Namaskar and welcome to Sunset Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues as well. Today we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, more specifically the ethical question with AI. Now, artificial intelligence is a top emerging technology with applications across industries and implications for our society. AI is a collective term for computer systems that can sense their environment, think, learn and take action in response to what they are sensing and their objectives as well. Forms of AI in use today include digital assistants, chatbots and machine learning, amongst others. Now, the global AI industry is thriving. In 2021, AI global funding doubled to $66.8 billion US. Each year, more and more companies and governments worldwide are adopting AI solutions. However, simultaneously, concerns have also been raised by experts on the ethical aspects of development and use of AI. Recently, Twitter chief Elon Musk and Apple's co-founder Steve, along with several other prominent names, have signed an open letter calling for a 6-month pause on the development of artificial intelligence systems that are more powerful than GPT-4. In India, the government has recently informed Parliament that to address the ethical concerns and potential risks associated with AI, various central and state government departments and agencies have commenced their efforts to standardize responsible AI development, use and promotion, or rather promote the adoption of best practices. So, what are these challenges and risks associated with artificial intelligence, and how can these issues be tackled? Today, in Perspective, we will take a closer look at all these issues and try and understand a bit more about them from a panel of distinguished experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Subimal Bhattacharjee, who is joining us here in the studio, cybersecurity expert. Welcome, Mr. Bhattacharjee. We're also joined by Professor Mausam. He's a professor of computer science at IIT Delhi and also founding head of Yardley School of Artificial Intelligence. Mr. Jaspreet, Bindra, founder of Tech Whisperer Limited, is also joining us. Yatish Rajawat, CEO of Center for Innovation in Public Policy, is also with us. And we also have Mr. Chatila. He's a professor, Institute of Intelligent Systems and Robotics at Sorbonne University in Paris. So welcome, all of you gentlemen, to Sunset TV. I'll begin with you, Mr. Chatila, because you're one of the signatories to that open letter. Let's first try and understand what are the concerns which all of you have raised in that letter. Why asking for a pause or for a moratorium of approximately 6 months?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for this question. It is indeed a letter about a specific kind of artificial intelligence systems which are called generative AI. These systems are not just able to analyze data, but they are mostly able to generate data. And for example, written documents which look like which are so advanced that they look like being written by human beings. The problem is, one of the problems I would like to raise very quickly, is that these systems are based on statistical machine learning, which is making correlations between elements of data over the internet, a very, very large amount of data. These correlations can correlate things which are not really related in reality. And therefore, the result, the product, the output of the system can include false information.
Okay.
Can include a mixture of false and correct information in a way that is very difficult to actually detect. So there is a real risk that, for example, the truth, the reality on which we all agree, be completely blurred, and mixing real events, real information with false information, and putting this out in the public. So the problem of deploying this technology at a stage which it's not completely mastered in terms of its risks, we don't have ways to manage these risks, this kind of risk, raised an issue. And this is why I've signed this petition, to raise the flag that something has to be done, and quickly.
Okay.
Of course, this doesn't mean that the solution is very easy and indeed will be given in 6 months. But the main objective of this is really to raise the flag so that we can speak about it publicly, because the technology is being developed and deployed to the general public. People have to be aware of this,
Okay.
policymakers as well, so that we can take the necessary measures.
Okay.
Thank you.
Another question, Mr. Chatila, is that is it too early to raise these objections, or is it too late?
I tend to say it's too late because these are already out there on the market and accessible. Of course, there have been a lot of discussions and initiatives about these issues since a long time. And for example, in Europe, there is work going on to develop the AI Act, a law that will be applied within a couple of years. It's finalized right now to address issues related to risk that is raised by some AI systems. But this will come later. So right now, what should we do? There is a responsibility on the community. There is a responsibility of the companies who develop those systems and who deploy them. And this is why we need to really raise this issue and address what we could do right now. And of course, the technology will continue to progress and to advance.
Okay.
No doubt about this.
Okay.
But we need to really do something about how to standardize, how to certify, how to manage the risks that are raised by this technology right now. And I'm speaking specifically about generative AI here.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much, Professor Chatila. Let me now bring those concerns to the other panelists as well. Professor Mausam, I'd like to start with you. How much do you agree with the concerns which have been raised by Professor Chatila and others in that open letter? You've been involved with the development of AI in various aspects for quite some time now. Do you share the same concerns or just some of them?
Thank you, Vishal, for inviting me to this very important discussion. And I think Professor Chatila has really set the stage. I think he has really articulated beautifully that there are challenges with AI. And there is no question that how can I disagree? He's absolutely right. There are absolutely questions about AI that need to be addressed. The issues about AI hallucinating, the issues about AI sometimes showcasing unethical, racist, or gender biased kinds of behavior. It cannot be directly applicable. Things cannot be automated. I kind of agree with Professor Chatila completely. But that said, I disagree with what to do about it. I believe very strongly that stopping AI is nobody's solution. Or stopping the progress of AI or stopping the research in AI cannot be a solution. In fact, whenever we identify issues with the technology, only research can actually find the solutions. So we can't stop research in AI to hope that AI will improve suddenly. So that's just not going to happen.
Okay.
For both philosophical reasons as well as practical reasons. Let me say some practical reasons, right? For example, one person has very correctly identified that if a lot of the West starts to stop progress in AI, China will suddenly get an edge because China will not stop progress in AI, and they will suddenly overtake the people who are working in AI.
Indeed.
Also, you will realize that Elon Musk and Steve Wozniak are both representing companies which is not strongly associated with OpenAI.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, they feel that they are at a competitive disadvantage, or at least that may be happening at the back of their mind, that they are potentially, there is a little bit of competitive disadvantage to their companies because they are far behind OpenAI. And if they were 6 months, maybe they will be able to, reach the same level and will have an equal competitive edge.
Okay.
I think there are vested interests at play here also in some of the people who have signed it or some of the big names who have signed it.
Okay.
I personally feel that AI is moving really fast, no question about it. Within the last few months, the progress has been amazing, incredible. We are all now trying to understand what is the recent capabilities, what can we do with it, what are the new challenges, how should we now make AI robust, and things like that. We cannot stop research.
Okay.
We have to make the research go forward as fast as we can so that as the technology is coming in, all the safeguards can be put in place. One last thing. I think the importance of standardization, certification that Professor Chatila talked about is incredibly important. They are important in the use case by use case setting. For example, if you start using GPT-4 for medical queries, then a very strong regulation is needed there.
Okay.
On the other hand, if you are using GPT-4 for writing, movie scripts, then it's not a big deal, right? Maybe it will, say some things and a human will take care of it. So we should, and one last thing, we cannot think of AI as automation. Those are two different aspects.
Indeed.
AI is giving you one output. Humans are going to work with AI to create the final output. So we should create regulation such that a human is constantly in touch with AI, overseeing AI, so that some of those safeguards can be in play. We can discuss more as we move along.
Indeed. So, Professor Mausam, you're pointing out that safeguards are required, an intervention is required, but perhaps going ahead and putting a pause is not the solution there. Let me bring in Mr. Bindra also. Mr. Bindra, how would you assess the situation here? Both the gentlemen seemingly are agreeing on at least one aspect, that yes, there are concerns, and those concerns will have to be dealt with. But in which way those concerns should be dealt with? And also, do you believe that we're running short of time, as Professor Chatila was referring to, that it's too late?
Thank you very much for having me here. I'm actually joining you from Cambridge in the UK, where a lot of what I'm doing is actually working on AI and ethics, and specifically with its implication to society. Now, why I said this was that, look, while the whole issue of its ethical problems, its dark side, if it may, has come to the world's notice probably in the last 3 or 4 months, researchers, academicians, practitioners. I was with Microsoft for many years, and I remember even from then, we have been wrestling with ethical issues of AI for a very long time. And actually, the horse did not bolt the stable 3 months back. The horse has been out many, many years back.
Okay.
Someone, I think it was Andrew Ang, who compared AI with electricity. And it's as powerful as electricity. And one of the things with electricity is that you don't think about it unless it's not there. Now, and so the general public never thought about AI, though AI was powering pretty much half their lives. But with generative AI, as both Professor Mausam and Chatila were pointing out, in some sense, that has come out from the back into your and my hands, and we realized the power of this technology, which actually is about 60 to 70 years old. Generative AI is younger, 5 or 6 years old, but that is it. Now, let me just respond with 2 or 3 specific things, because one can go on. One is that definitely we need to be thinking very hard about regulating the direction of where this technology is going, though in some cases it might be a bit late. I do agree with Professor Mausam that pausing for 6 months is probably not the right way to do it, because I don't think it will achieve anything, the 6-month pause, from a practical, concrete viewpoint.
Okay.
However, I also do agree with Professor Chatila that, we need to see this as a symbolic gesture in some way, that, look, a lot of important people are getting up, raising their hand and saying that, look, don't get drowned by just the positive news and the excitement and the frenzy around it. Do something more about it. Of late, in the past couple of years, I and a few others have actually been advocating a different kind of process or different kind of regulation, probably thinking of it like nuclear technology, and the world getting together like it did with nuclear dual-use technology and creating a IAEA kind of world body, which actually, kind of regulates it. So we definitely need a regulation mechanism, but not the 6-month pause kind of mechanism.
Okay.
Number 2, there are, specifically with generative AI, there are big issues. Some of them have been mentioned, that technology hallucinates. It makes up things as it goes along. It is optimized for plausibility or believability rather than the truth. And therefore, there are huge issues of plagiarism, of bias, of generating fake news, of manipulation of elections, etc. But I think the key here is that what we fear is that AI, specifically generative AI, will take agency. It will take agency from the human being. So far, human beings were deciding, what these tools would do. And if there's a way that the tools start deciding by themselves, then there is a problem.
Okay.
And to conclude, and number 3, in some senses with GPT-4, the tools have started deciding for themselves.
Okay.
There has been an instance where GPT-4 broke a CAPTCHA, that secret code which is there, which a human being writes to separate human beings and machines, those letters or pictures. It could not get into a website because of the CAPTCHA, and so it went to another site called TaskRabbit, which had humans doing tasks, and it actually employed a human, lied to the human saying that it was not a machine, and the human broke that CAPTCHA for him, and it accessed the website. So I think there are some worrying signs which are out there, which basically mean that in some sense it might be very late. I just hope it's not too late.
Okay, okay, fair enough. Let me bring in both, Yatish and Mr. Subimal as well. Mr. Bhattacharjee, you've been listening very patiently, and we have had this conversation on generative AI or the artificial intelligence, its uses, positive aspects of it. Sometimes we've also had a discussion on the ethical questions which are faced. But with the gentleman in the panel, pointing out various issues, how much, to what extent do you agree that yes, these ethical questions are of utmost importance, they are staring us in the face, they need a solution right now before we move ahead with further research, or both things can move hand in hand with each other?
No, I think, both things will move, maybe not hand in hand with each other, but, taking from the wisdom of the three distinguished panelists, between GPT-3 to ChatGPT, there is a whole change of horizon. Suddenly in November last year when ChatGPT came, somewhere the awareness level increased, somewhere the fear and concerns around ethics and every aspect related to that came up. I'll just tell you, last year sometimes, maybe a year from now, I was sitting with the Joint Secretary with some of his officers in the Ministry of External Affairs, and talking about GPT-3, I sensed that no one was aware of it. And when I showed them a couple of things that came up in a minute, were kind of odd. Now, the same officers today also use ChatGPT for, maybe some basic drafts. The question is that where it is going, as Mr. Bindra just pointed out, that, the worry is that is it the programming, is it going to that end that, is going to defeat human, is going to leave human behind, is going to take away all those ethical boundaries that still look at humans. So, taking on Professor Raja's point at the beginning, that statistical correlation, that actually comes with all of this AI programming, and the train and test, that actually determines about how much, efficacy a certain program or solution or whatever that generative AI that is coming into the front. I think that's going on, the iterations, the improvements of all of that, it's continuing, whether it's in labs, whether it's in the companies that are looking to mine it, the competition, possibly not necessarily always very healthy, that's also been alluded to. So all of that has created a concern around ethical issues. So in 2017, there was an attempt, there was a conference in California, and 23 SC-LOMAR principles for AI were defined. Primarily it looked at the R&D aspects and everything and all.
Okay.
But if you look at it, all these companies that get involved in this, all the labs that get involved in it, today they are in a kind of a wild goose chase, or they are going without any regulations, they are going without any kind of standardizations, etc. Hence, I think the most important point, Vishal, is to look at finding a regulatory regime sooner than later.
Okay.
It was alluded to. It was mentioned, and he mentioned about nuclear. But if you see, nuclear and space today have global, bodies and principles.
And those are entirely different technologies.
Yeah, but cyber is a far much more, intrusive technology. And even if you take AI as a subset of cyber, not necessarily it could be overlap in few places. I think this is something that we'll all have to look at. The group of governmental experts of the UN that looked at cyber, the security, and all of this aspect well, they are looking at many of the issues in a much larger scale. But when you look at something like AI, the way it is penetrating, the way it is creating concerns, the way it possibly could, create rumbles in the society, I think we have to look at, and that's where India also has a chance, because today, as India as chair of the GPI, the Global Partnership for Artificial Intelligence, as India took over the presidentship last year in November, and clearly this GPI is an attempt to look at the regulatory and the R&D and everything part. The ethical things, I think we have to take leadership in this and push.
We have to take from there. Yatish, I'd like to, bring you in here on this issue. You've heard all the panelists, and when we try to understand as to where are we in the present scenario vis-a-vis generative AI and its various applications, its uses as well, and the concerns which have been raised time and again. This is not the first time that ethical issues have been raised, but how far have we been able to address those concerns so far? And we moved a bit further into the domain when we're talking about research into and application of AI.
Vishal, just to kind of put this into context, we have already possibly surpassed development in this field that are beyond a country or organization controls. So this open letter which came out is basically, as Professor Chantali also pointed out, is more representative of the fear and the importance of control. Now, a pause or a stop is, whether it is possible or not possible, is itself a big question, because who will pause? Will all the research labs, education institutions in the world agree? And they'll all have to agree. Basically, they'll have to agree that we will stop our research. Now, research, as you know, which is happening in companies, most companies have stopped publishing their cutting-edge research in AGI for the last 6 months. The reason being they see it now as a very strong competitive edge. So what is it that we are going to stop? Are we going to stop research? Are we going to stop its use? Or are we going to create some kind of a international system which will stop AI engines from using data, or AI engines from using computing power, and prevent the further growth of the artificial general intelligence? And the professors pointed out, and I classify now Jaspreet also into the professor category. You see, we must distinguish between artificial intelligence and AGI. When we say that the AI has taken on the almost a human-like capability of general human intelligence, it is capable. It is very difficult to control anybody with average intelligence. It is almost impossible to control anybody with super intelligence. You make any rule, anything for anybody who is supremely intelligent, he'll find a way of breaking it. So when we talk about, if you were to kind of put the AGI as a human super intelligence, what is the control that you can have on them? There are only two controls. Those two controls need to be more discussed and debated, rather than the issue whether we should pause them or whether we should stop them or not. That issue, we have passed that debate completely.
How
would you stop the?
Yes, Yatish, that's the point. We'll definitely dwell into that aspect only, and points which you are making do further underline the fact that yes, there is a need, and a very urgent need, to put in place a mechanism to, if control is not the word any one of us or any expert out there would want to use, then perhaps regulation might be the better word to put in place, saying we need to fine-tune the way which we are moving ahead. We're taking a short break here, but before we go into the break, I'll also inform our audience that Divya Siddarth has also joined us. She's co-director with Collective Intelligence Project. Divya, we'll come back from the break, and then we'll continue this conversation, because you're also one of the signatories to that open letter. So we'll try and understand more about as to not only the why, but the way forward from here as well. So keep watching. We'll be back in a while. Welcome back. So today in Perspective, we're talking about the ethical concerns of research and development in the field of artificial intelligence and its application as well. So far, we have had a wonderful discussion with our panelists. And before we went into the break, we told you that Divya is also with us. Divya, welcome to the show. Let's start and try and, figure out another aspect. We've looked at the why part in the first, 25, 30 odd minutes about why is there a need to look into these concerns. Now, the question is, how do we deal with it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the major question. How do we move forward? And at the Collective Intelligence Project, with our many partners, our focus is essentially on how do we ensure that the direction of technological development is in the public interest, which first requires understanding what the public interest is. So one big part of our work is running large-scale democratic processes to determine what that interest might look like. And in particular, we're interested in doing that outside of the Western context, which we think is really important. So we'd love to partner with the folks on this call in terms of thinking about surfacing public input on the direction of tech development around the world. Secondly, I think one major part of the letter was there are several steps forward that many different kinds of people agree on. Regardless of whether you think we're tracking towards artificial general intelligence or you're concerned about present-day harms, there are things like new and capable regulatory authorities that I think we all agree we need to build, much more advanced third-party auditing and oversight capabilities, which we could invest significant resources in, both on the global governance stage and also at the nation-state level and also at the AI lab level. Provenance and watermarking systems in terms of how to distinguish, the output of synthetic media generation as opposed to real or human-generated media content. And broadly, I think this is a time, as others have said, to come together around both the short-term steps that are necessary, which might or might not include a pause. I think it's already been pointed out that it's mostly about what are the things that we can build and ensure we have oversight and accountability into that are very specific. Provenance, watermarking, auditing, standard setting, regulation, all of these kinds of things are being worked on at different levels. And we need to coordinate between those levels. And at the same time, I think we have to understand that this is technology that will have significant implications for society. And that means that we have to go to people and give them a chance to have a voice in the direction of development, which is the other major aspect of our work.
Okay. Mr. Bindra, earlier you were talking about, and you agreed with what Professor Chatila was also earlier saying, that perhaps it's a bit late to raise those concerns, but, taking it from there and juxtaposing to what Divya has just said, this, technology, that is artificial intelligence, is not even... is not only quick in terms of development and research. There are new avenues which are brought in public domain every day. New ways of its application is also really important. So when we do a sort of cost benefit analysis, where do we stand and where do we sort of move? Because that's also a very big question. That's a dilemma.
No, you're absolutely right. And, I think the way the conversation has been going so far, we have been only, because of the topic of discussion, we've been only looking at the flip side, in a sense, the dark side of the technology. But, there's an equal, if not greater, bright side, sunny side too. And as I had mentioned in my conversation earlier, actually, AI has been driving so much of our lives without us even knowing so. Our commerce, our networks, our the Ubers and Olas around us, and the entire payment systems which we are so now used to, everything which relies on data. And so there's a huge plus side. In fact, one of the things which Divya mentioned was interesting, that how to make the society aware or public aware of both the benefits as well as the flip side, the harmful parts. Survey after survey, including a recent one by Stanford, actually shows that people in India and Asia are actually much more positive about AI and
more receptive to
benefits of AI than people in the West and Europe, specifically where I am right now. And so, just saying that we're going to stop AI without making people realize and people who are optimistic about its use is without aligning society, isn't going to go too far. And so we need to do that awareness building, etc., along with various other regulatory mechanisms. I do go back to my statement earlier, saying that while we cannot compare it from technology to technology with, say, nuclear technology or bio weapons, etc., because this is much faster. There's just every day there is new developments happening. Everyone is caught up in the excitement and the frenzy of it. In fact, worryingly, while a lot of the big tech companies are working very hard to develop this, at the same time, the ethics people in those companies are either powerless or not able to stop some of the work which is happening. And so actually I go back to saying that, look, it is not, as someone else was saying, within the domain of a single company or a single government or a single country. It actually needs a concerted global effort. And that's why I had mentioned the IAEA analogy and the nuclear non-proliferation analogy a little earlier, which I'm happy to talk about later.
Okay. Professor Mausam, again, we would start from there only as to, in your views, does the risks outweigh the benefits, or is it the other way around? That is something which all of us will have to understand, because that's really important. When Mr. Bindra was referring to that research wherein it looks like, people in Asian region are a bit more receptive. So is it because, people in that region sort of are more in favor of the benefits from the artificial intelligence? And as far as this are concerned, of course, there are concerns. But then how do we address those concerns, scientifically speaking?
Sure. So lots to unpack here. Before I answer your question, though, I want to quickly respond to a couple of points that have been made because they have come in again and again.
Okay.
First of all, Jaspreet talked about the sort of analogy with nuclear. And I firmly believe that the analogy is misplaced.
Okay.
The reason it's misplaced is because nuclear is one technology which can give electricity or energy and can be generally used either in bombs or in electricity. You can think about that use case and you can think about regulation. On the other hand, AI is a technology which is cross-cutting, which is a broad spectrum technology. AI in sports, AI in medicine, AI in law, AI in materials discovery, AI in manufacturing optimization, AI with robotics. Those are the places, those are the verticals where we will need to think about and sort of imagine regulation or whatever.
So
it's a
large bouquet to look at.
If we want to think about regulation, which is another term that has come out, third-party audit, oversight, regulation, control, right? Those points have been raised. We should not think about regulating AI. We should think about regulating AI's use case in a specific scenario. Should AI replace a teacher? Let us regulate it. Absolutely not. Can a teacher use AI in the following way? Maybe yes, maybe no, depending upon the use case. I think that's the level of granularity we will have to go to.
Okay.
We cannot think about IAEA comparison. That's the first part I wanted to bring up.
Okay.
Another very interesting comment was made regarding the Stanford thing that India is very well aware, actually, in some ways, and very well positive. I would say that some of the credit goes to the television channels and the news media and the print media. I mean, we cannot take away the credit of Rajya Sabha TV, which regularly brings out the programs in AI.
Thank you, Professor Mausam. We are now Sunset TV, but thank you so much for the compliment.
Sunset TV, indeed. Sorry, my apologies. And similarly, our Prime Minister Modi and the higher and the topmost administration has been very early recognizing the importance and the potential benefits of AI to the society. And Niti Aayog has brought out the national strategy in AI in 2018, where many other countries were far behind. I'm not saying we were the first, but we were very early in this early process of AI's growth.
Okay.
And that has really benefited the country because now country is thinking about where AI can be used and so on and so forth. Now coming to the question that you raised, right? Cost-benefit analysis. We should realize that AI, when it is being developed, is going to make mistakes. Initially, we will not even understand the kinds of mistakes it may make. We will start trusting it and it will suddenly make a mistake because we don't know how the AI is thinking. We don't have explainability. AI cannot explain itself just yet, right? Therefore, it is incredibly important that in mission critical situations like healthcare, like space, like places where people can really have a significant negative consequence of indiscriminate use of AI, there is much more oversight, much more audit, much more regulation, and careful usage, excessive testing, extensive testing to make sure that wherever we are using AI, it is all right.
Okay.
On the other hand, there may be some other scenarios where it may be less critical, like thinking about which particular message to recommend to a user, which movie to recommend to a user, which which website or Google or and those kinds of things. I think that's where we can take a little bit more chances.
Okay.
So I think cost benefit analysis is not of AI.
Okay.
It is about the use of AI, a case by case analysis to figure out where it should be used. And
the application of the technology is what you're referring to, Professor Mausam. Yatish, would you agree with this aspect, looking at this, that let's not regulate the research part, let's regulate the application part? Is that the solution?
So Vishal, this is the boiling the ocean model. Sorry, Professor Mausam, but it doesn't work. You cannot define every use case, and you cannot define and create controls on every use case. It is impossible for any policymaker to do it. It is impossible to police, and it is almost impossible. If you can't police it, then you can't regulate it. I don't agree with other mental frameworks also, that oversight and audits are frameworks which will work. I believe that if we are thinking of AGI, we need to think about superintelligence, and therefore we need to understand what drives it. And when you look at and the word that I want to use it actually, maryada. So we have to look at the maryada of the system. So if you have somebody super intelligent, you cannot police them. You cannot control them. You cannot regulate them. So therefore, you need to make them realize basic maryada, which is basic principles. So, so those foundation principles need to be accepted, acknowledged, and inbuilt in all computing processes. It also needs to be built in all large language models or all large data sets which AI is accessing. So now those foundational principles are already there in some sense. They've been well discussed, not in the last 3 years, but they've been well discussed for the last 25 odd years. So AI is not new in that sense. These discussions are not new. People are rediscovering that. And I disagree with Professor Bindra about Indians knowing about AI or Indians being positive about AI. I don't believe surveys done out of Stanford are actually representative of this country, because these surveys talk to 5 people and extrapolate 5 people data out of over 50 crores, and they cannot capture the zeitgeist that. See, what are people worried about? Are people in India worried about jobs? Yes, they are worried about jobs. Are they worried about getting jobs? Yes, they are very worried about getting jobs. Now, is AI going to take away those basic jobs and services? Yes, they are going to take it. So how can any survey conclude that Indians are positive about AI?
Okay.
Now, there is no greater fear in this country.
I'm pretty sure that Yatish is a topic of a separate discussion. We'll come to that part as well. But sticking to what you're saying earlier, and the counterpoint which you made to Professor Mausam, and I could see Divya also there nodding in agreement. I'll come to you as well, Divya. But first, let me bring in Mr. Subimal here. What's the best way? Is it going via the research or development route, or is it the other way around? Let us research, let us develop, and then perhaps in the application part, on a use case based scenario, it'll be much easier or better to regulate. Which is the best way? Because one thing which all of us have agreed to is that yes, there are concerns and there is a need for regulation. But how to approach that regulation is the bigger one here.
Yeah, I think, Vishal, there is no clear-cut answer at this point of time that you can say that, what is the way you go ahead with the research, or, should you kind of first put a regulatory regime and then get the research in place. But however, I would also, kind of disagree with Professor Mausam here that, we need to have a overarching digital regulatory regime. We have been very late in this. There are many aspects of it that has given a carte blanche to a lot of nations as well as rogue elements, to all the possibilities to come to a point where it becomes a flashpoint. Hence, we all have to work towards that, and I feel that India has the strength, the government has the credibility, the great work done since 2018 through Niti Aayog and the various institutions. So there is a fair understanding about the possibilities, the positive side, the applications that are happening in many sectors, and also now a larger understanding about where this could go. So we have a scope to take up leadership, and GPI gives us an opportunity, and I personally think that this is what India should look at. However, coming specifically now to your question, I think within that whole regulatory regime that you speak about, we have to find structure in which all the research activities around AI, it's multi-directional. So now when it's offloaded to the industry, to the system, to the whole world as a large, it just cannot be something someone does and tomorrow uses the media to publicize, puts across something, collects data, makes it an even more security nightmare or privacy nightmare, whatever. I think there has to be a certain way in which this is disseminated, and that is where the regulatory regime has to look at very, very closely. It's a very complex situation. It is very difficult from how anything would have been arrived at space or even the nuclear activity. That's why we still don't have any agreement on cyber till now. We are talking in a multi-stakeholder fashion, but we still don't have an answer. So I think this is complex, but we will have to find a way where all these 25 countries under GPI possibly takes a lead and put something in place.
Okay.
Let some flesh be put and then built on top of it. Then let's understand what goes fast, how much what goes, and how it is, I don't say controlled, but at least it is managed, because it cannot become a kind of a fear psychosis and and getting into some places where as a humanity now then we start struggling about what we have done to ourselves.
Okay. Now, Divya, why would you not agree with what Professor Mausam was pointing out in terms of regulating the use case scenario or the application part there as well? Because the letter which all of you have signed is clearly in favor of putting a stop to all the research and development, the moratorium for at least 6 months. There are two questions here. One, what purpose would it serve? And two, what's the best way to move ahead? Because perhaps when you restart it after 6 months or maybe after a year, one, that is difficult to achieve, we will again face the same problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I was nodding not because I purely disagree, but because I think it's an insufficient approach. To Professor Yatish's point, it's not enough to purely regulate impacts. They will accelerate exponentially and we will never catch all of them, right? But at the same time, it's clearly very difficult to build values directly into technology. I think in a lot of senses, that's something we'd all like to see happen. We would all like to see there to be some collective understanding of the appropriate principles that we want to build into this technology and then build it in directly in some way. Folks work on that type of question and it's very difficult to do. And so I think we have to be quite expansive about the types of actions we need to take. We will need some investment into the regulatory side. I think that's absolutely correct. I think that it's still necessary to do third-party auditing and standard setting, even if it's not enough. I think we need to surface much better discussions of collective values and input them directly into the technology. That's a big part of what we're working on. How do we figure out what those values are and how do we input them directly into the technology? But it's a very difficult question. I think if we knew how to input values into technology already, we wouldn't have run into the many other technology related problems that we currently have as a society. And I think let's think even practically about the development and deployment of a language model, right? It includes some training data. You train a base model. You do reinforcement learning from human feedback on that model. Maybe you do AI feedback on that model. Then you fine tune that model. Then there are certain terms of service to deploy that model. You might evaluate and red team that model. At each of those steps, there is a chance for us to maybe input some sense of principles, but it's also clearly there are many degrees of freedom. Do you do it at the level of the base model, at the level of the company that's using the model, gating API access? Like I think when you try to think about the actual process of how you regulate and understand what's happening, you see why there are so many emergent capabilities. I mean, the space of inputs and outputs for a language model is theoretically unbounded to the entropy of natural language, right? And so we're dealing with something that's really quite general. And so I think in terms of moving forward, we need to invest in the regulatory paradigm, and we need to recognize it's not enough. We need to invest in collective value setting and inputs into these different processes and deployment sectors. And we need to recognize that's not enough. We need to regulate some of the impacts across sectors, across education, across potential for addiction, across children using these models. And we still need to recognize that's not enough. And I think, one downside that's come out of the letter in some ways is I think we're seeing some more polarization around, we should do this at the expense of something else, or we should do X and not Y, and we should do Y and not Z. And really, I think we are dealing with something that requires multiple different types of approaches. And to points that have been said before, is not entirely different from the kinds of questions we've already dealt with. I mean, there's something that we can learn from the scientific peer review process. There's something that we can learn from the FDA and ways that drugs get regulated. There's something we can learn from multi-stakeholder internet standard setting for certain applications. And we will need to bring these different types of perspectives on board to actually deal with something that is quite a society scale transformation. And I think it's interesting that someone brought up labor automation, for example. Like, it is difficult to build in values into an AI system in such a way that it deals with the problem of labor automation. That's obviously a problem that has to be dealt with outside of the technology itself. And yet there are other kinds of problems like misinformation and hallucinations and even potential for engagement addiction that can be dealt with within the technology. And so I think we have to get a good understanding of these different approaches. And it's most important to coordinate all of these different sectors and entities to figure out, okay, how do we do this at a level that, is sufficiently global, is participative, is efficient, that we don't just talk about it for the next 6 months. And I think we're all, in a sense, invested in that future. So I'm hopeful that we can coordinate around.
One final question, Divya, before we bring this discussion to an end. Is that the majority sentiment amongst the industry peers, the tech experts as well? Because there will have to be a majority sentiment to come to this sort of conclusion. This involves not just one or two individuals or companies or governments as well, because this is a technology which is beyond geographical borders.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hesitate to speak for the globe on this one, but I do think that there are increasing consensus around these specific points of different vectors of attack, different ways to address risk surface areas, and to Jaspreet's point, different ways to think about opportunity as well. And so while I would hesitate to say, oh, I'm confident this is a global consensus or anything like that, I think at least in our partnerships, both in the US with industry and with policymakers around the world, we are seeing more of a movement towards this. I think the real question is, can we move quickly enough? Can we coordinate? And can we do this in a way that's genuinely better than how we've dealt with society scale technology transformations in the past, which we can learn a lot from, but have not always been perfect.
Okay. So clearly the real question is, how fast can we move? Thank you so much, Divya, Siddarth joining us, Jaspreet, Bindra, Yatish, Professor Mausam, and Subimal as well for sharing your views and insight as our experts and distinguished panelists were pointing out. This is a complex situation, but an interesting one as well. We're faced with a lot of opportunities when we're talking about artificial intelligence, the world of artificial intelligence, the way it can be applied. The research and development on a daily basis come up with new avenues, new frontiers, which can be looked upon into. But then there are concerns with the ethical side of it, the ethical use, and therein comes the need for putting in place a regulatory mechanism. And not only a mechanism which can be governed by the governments, but also individual responsibilities from the developers as well. We're going to keep a very close watch on this field, the developments here, and keep on bringing you all the detailed analysis and some other topics also. Till then, keep watching Sunset Television. Thank you.